My wife cheated on me and gave birth to a third child that wasn't mine. The DNA test confirmed everything. She manipulated me and the children and tried to take my share in court. I never imagined I would find myself sitting alone in my car at almost 3 a.m., staring blankly into the darkness, my mind overwhelmed by the storm my life had turned into. It's strange how life sneaks up on you. One moment you think you have everything under control, and the next moment, it all comes crashing down, leaving you grappling with decisions you never thought you'd have to make. Where should I even begin? My wife, Sarah, and I were the couple everyone thought had it all. We met when I was in my mid-20s, back when I still had hope that life would go exactly as planned. Sarah was everything I thought I wanted: intelligent, beautiful, and full of ambition. I was working in IT at the time, while Sarah had just started her career as a teacher. We got married quickly, maybe too quickly, but at the time, it felt like the right thing to do. We were in love, or at least, we thought we were. For the first few years, everything seemed perfect. We bought a small house, a place to call our own, and eventually, we had 2 kids. Sarah decided to stop working and stay home with the children, while I took on the responsibility of supporting the family financially. It seemed like a great arrangement. She loved being with the kids, and I was ready to work hard to provide for them. But as the years passed, the weight of life began to chip away at our relationship. I started working more and more, putting in long hours at the office to make sure we could cover the mortgage and the growing pile of bills. And while I was exhausted from work, Sarah seemed to be getting more and more frustrated with me. I didn't notice it at first, but she began to criticize me over small things. It started with complaints about me coming home late from work. Then, it became more than that. She'd complain that I wasn't doing enough around the house, that I wasn't spending enough time with the kids. I tried to reason with her. I was working long hours to keep everything afloat, and I thought she understood that. But to her, it didn't seem to matter. All she saw was that I wasn't there, and it started to feel like no matter what I did, it was never enough. The tension between us grew. Sarah would accuse me of being distant, emotionally absent, even though I felt like I was doing everything I could just to keep our lives running smoothly. And the more she pushed, the more I pulled away. We'd argue over the smallest things. Whether I helped enough with the kids, why I didn't text her during the day, even though I barely had time to grab lunch at work. Every argument felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship. It was exhausting, and I started to wonder if this was how things would always be. Around that time, I started talking more with Rachel, one of Sarah's closest friends. Rachel was always around because she and Sarah were inseparable. She'd come over for dinner, spend time with the kids, and join us for family gatherings. She and I got along well, but it wasn't until my relationship with Sarah began to deteriorate that I started to notice how easy it was to talk to Rachel. She listened without judgment and didn't expect anything from me. She understood what I was going through because she'd been through similar things in her own life. At first, our conversations were innocent enough. We'd talk about life, work, and our frustrations with relationships. It was refreshing to talk to someone who didn't constantly criticize me or make me feel like I wasn't enough. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, Rachel was Sarah's best friend. But the more Sarah and I fought, the more I found myself leaning on Rachel for support. Things with Sarah took a turn when she found out she was pregnant again. Instead of being happy, I felt a deep sense of dread. We were already struggling, and adding another baby to the mix seemed like the worst possible idea. But Sarah was thrilled. She acted like the pregnancy was a gift from the universe, like it would magically fix everything that was wrong between us. She threw a big party to announce the pregnancy, inviting friends and family to celebrate. I remember standing in the corner of the room, trying to smile while I felt like my entire life was slipping out of control. Sarah was glowing, making a speech about how excited we were to grow our family, and all I could think about was how trapped I felt. I didn't want another child. I didn't even know if I wanted to stay in the marriage anymore. As I looked across the room, my eyes met Rachel's, and there was something in her expression that told me she understood exactly how I was feeling. After the party, I slipped outside for some air, and Rachel followed. We stood on the porch in silence for a while before she finally spoke. "You don't look happy," she said softly. I shook my head. "I'm not." That moment changed everything. It was the first time I had admitted out loud just how miserable I was. And from that point on, things between Sarah and me only got worse. The fights became more frequent and more intense. Sarah would accuse me of not caring about her, about the kids, about our family. She'd throw things, yell, and I would shut down. There was no point in trying to reason with her anymore. She had already decided that everything wrong with our marriage was my fault. The more Sarah pushed me away, the closer I grew to Rachel. At first, it was just the occasional text or phone call. But soon, Rachel became the one person I could turn to when things got bad. We started meeting for coffee, talking about our lives, our problems, and eventually about Sarah. Rachel understood me in a way that Sarah never could. She didn't judge me or make me feel like a failure. She just listened. And the more time I spent with Rachel, the more I realized that I was falling for her. I knew it was wrong. Rachel was Sarah's best friend, and I was still married, even if my marriage was falling apart. But it didn't matter. Rachel was everything I needed, kind, understanding, and supportive in a way that Sarah hadn't been in years. It wasn't long before things between Rachel and me crossed the line. One night, after another brutal fight with Sarah, I went to Rachel's apartment. We had talked plenty of times before, but this time, it was different. I was exhausted, drained from the constant tension at home, and when I walked into her apartment, all I wanted was to escape. Rachel poured me a drink, and we sat on her couch in silence for a while. We didn't need to talk. The air between us was heavy with unspoken feelings, and before I knew it, we were kissing. It wasn't planned, but it felt right. For the first time in months, I felt like I was wanted, like I was worth something. That night changed everything. Rachel and I started seeing each other more often, and it wasn't just about talking anymore. We were having an affair. And as guilty as I felt, I couldn't stop. Being with Rachel made me feel alive again. She was everything Sarah wasn't: understanding, kind, and patient. She didn't expect anything from me other than to be myself. But the guilt was there, lurking in the background. Every time I saw Sarah, I felt like I was betraying her, even though our marriage was already hanging by a thread. And then, things got worse. Sarah started coming home late, making vague excuses about meeting up with old friends or needing space. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then, Rachel planted the seed of doubt in my mind. "Do you think she's seeing someone else?" Rachel asked one day over coffee. I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe." The thought gnawed at me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Sarah had been acting strange for months. She was always on her phone, texting people I didn't know, and she'd started staying out later and later. My suspicions grew, but I didn't have any proof. And without proof, I knew better than to accuse her of anything. Sarah was smart. She'd twist things around, make me look like the bad guy. I needed evidence. One night, after another argument, I found her phone on the kitchen counter. It was buzzing with messages, and I couldn't help myself. I picked it up. What I found confirmed everything I had feared. She had been seeing someone else. The messages were clear, intimate, and there was no mistaking what was going on. When I confronted her the next day, she didn't even try to deny it. "What did you expect?" she said, her voice cold. "You've been checked out for months." That was the end of our marriage. I knew there was no going back after that. But Sarah wasn't going to let me leave without a fight. She threatened to take the kids from me, to ruin me financially. And when she found out about Rachel, things got even worse. She filed for child support, claiming that the baby she was carrying was mine. But I knew the truth. The timing didn't add up. I hadn't been with her during the time she could have gotten pregnant. I was sure the baby wasn't mine, but I needed proof. My lawyer suggested we push for a DNA test, and after months of court battles, the results finally came in. The baby wasn't mine. It was a strange feeling, part relief, part anger. Sarah had been manipulating me for months, using the pregnancy to control me, to trap me. And now, the truth was out. I was free, but the cost had been high. I had lost my marriage, my family, and my sense of stability. The life I had built was gone, but in its place, there was something new. Rachel had been there through it all, supporting me when everything else fell apart. And when she told me she was pregnant, I didn't feel the dread I had felt with Sarah. I felt hope. This was different. This was real. I was going to be a father again, and this time, I was ready. In the months that followed, Rachel and I started building a life together. We found a house outside the city, away from all the memories of everything that had happened. We made plans for the future, for our family. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living again. When our son was born, everything changed. Holding him in my arms, I realized that this was my second chance. A chance to be the kind of father I had always wanted to be. A chance to build a life filled with love and hope. Sarah was still out there, still trying to cause problems, but she didn't have any power over me anymore. I was free. Looking down at my son, I knew that I had finally found the life I had been searching for. It hadn't come easy, and the road had been filled with pain and loss, but in the end, I had found my way. With Rachel by my side, I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Even though the paternity test had proven that Sarah's child wasn't mine, the fallout was far from over. The relief I felt that day was quickly overshadowed by the weight of everything that had happened. It wasn't just about the end of my marriage anymore. It was about rebuilding a life that had been systematically dismantled by years of emotional manipulation, deceit, and betrayal. Sarah had spent months weaving a narrative that painted me as the absent husband, the uncaring father, while she played the role of the doting wife and mother. But now, that carefully constructed lie had collapsed, and I was left standing amidst the ruins. After the DNA results came in, I decided to tell a few close friends and family members. It wasn't something I wanted to keep a secret. Sarah had made a mess of things for so long, and I needed to clear the air. I was done being the villain in her story. It was time for the truth to come out, and with the evidence in hand, I knew I had the upper hand. The reactions varied. Some people were shocked, others were angry, but everyone felt the sting of betrayal. Sarah had lied to everyone, not just me. She had used the pregnancy to manipulate those around her, just like she had manipulated me. But I knew Sarah wasn't going to go down without a fight. She wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. It wasn't long before the whispers began. Friends, neighbors, even our families. Everyone was talking about what had happened. Sarah's carefully cultivated image as the victim was unraveling, and she knew it. I could see the panic in her eyes the next time we met to exchange the kids. She had lost control, and for someone like her, that was the worst possible outcome. "Can we talk about this?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied coldly. "The truth is out, Sarah. You lied, and now everyone knows." She flinched, but quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing in anger. "You didn't have to humiliate me like this. You humiliated yourself," I said, turning away before she could respond. I was done with her games. For too long, she had twisted things around, making me out to be the bad guy. But not anymore. Despite my personal victory, the hardest part was still dealing with the kids. They didn't understand what was happening, why their parents were suddenly living apart, or why there was so much tension whenever Sarah and I were in the same room. I did my best to shield them from it, to make things as normal as possible, but there were moments, quiet, heartbreaking moments, when I saw the confusion in their eyes. They didn't know why Mommy and Daddy were fighting, and it tore me apart. No matter how angry I was at Sarah, I couldn't let my feelings get in the way of being a good father. The kids were innocent in all of this, and they deserved stability, even if everything else around them was falling apart. Sarah, for all her faults, still loved them. But I could tell that our split had affected her relationship with them, too. They sensed something was wrong, even if they couldn't put it into words. Meanwhile, things with Rachel were moving forward faster than I could have ever imagined. She had been my rock through everything, the one person I could turn to when everything else fell apart. But now, it was more than that. Our relationship had deepened. We weren't just two people leaning on each other in difficult times. We were building a life together. The pregnancy brought us closer, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on solid ground. We talked about the future, about the kind of life we wanted to build for ourselves and our child. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of everything felt overwhelming. Sarah's constant attempts to claw back control, the strain of co-parenting, the lingering legal battles. But through it all, Rachel was there. She didn't waver, didn't judge. She was patient, understanding, And more than anything, she believed in me. I hadn't realized how much I needed that. After years of being torn down by Sarah's criticisms and accusations, having someone who genuinely saw me, flaws and all, and still believed I was worth something, it changed everything. With Rachel, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I was rebuilding. We started looking for houses outside the city. We wanted a fresh start, a place where we could raise our child without the shadow of everything that had happened hanging over us. It felt surreal at first, like I was stepping into a new life I hadn't expected, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I had hope for the future. As Rachel's pregnancy progressed, the excitement grew. We went to ultrasound appointments together, started picking out names, and spent hours talking about what kind of parents we wanted to be. It was different this time. When Sarah had been pregnant, I had felt trapped, overwhelmed by the weight of everything that was wrong between us. But with Rachel, it was different. I didn't feel trapped. I felt ready. I'll never forget the day Rachel went into labor. We had been preparing for weeks, but nothing can truly prepare you for that moment. I paced the hospital hallways, my heart racing, my mind running through every possible scenario. But when our son was finally born, when I held him in my arms for the first time, everything else faded away. All the pain, the betrayal, the years of emotional turmoil, it all disappeared in that moment. Looking down at my son, I realized something. This was my second chance. A chance to be the kind of father I had always wanted to be. A chance to build a life filled with love and hope. With Rachel by my side, I knew I could do it. The past was behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a future worth fighting for. But even as I stood there, cradling my newborn son, I knew that the hardest part was still ahead. Sarah wasn't going to let go of her hold on me easily. She had already filed for child support, despite knowing that the baby she was carrying wasn't mine. She was still trying to paint herself as the victim, still trying to control the narrative. But I wasn't the same man I had been before. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. Over the next few months, Sarah continued to make things difficult. The legal battles dragged on, and every interaction with her was filled with tension. She tried to use the kids as leverage, threatening to keep them from me if I didn't give in to her demands. But I stood my ground. I had the truth on my side, and I wasn't going to let her use the children to control me anymore. Through it all, Rachel was there. She was my anchor, keeping me steady when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. We spent our weekends setting up the nursery, picking out baby clothes, and planning for the future. Every time I looked at her, I felt a surge of gratitude. I had been through so much, lost so much, but in the end, I had found something worth holding on to. As the months passed, things with Sarah slowly began to settle down. The court had ruled in my favor regarding child support, and there was no denying the DNA results. Her baby wasn't mine. She had lost her hold over me, and with that, her power began to fade. Her social circle, the friends who had once rallied around her, began to distance themselves. People started to see her for who she really was, and the support she had relied on for so long began to crumble. It wasn't an easy process. There were still moments of tension, especially when it came to co-parenting. Sarah was still angry, still bitter about how things had turned out. But I did my best to keep things civil for the sake of the kids. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of our mess. I made sure to spend as much time with them as possible, to let them know that no matter what happened between me and their mother, I was still their father. I would always be there for them. In the midst of all this, Rachel and I continued to build our life together. We found a house in a quiet neighborhood outside the city, a place where we could start fresh. It wasn't easy, blending our lives together after everything we had been through, but we took it one day at a time. We didn't rush things. We knew that after all the pain and chaos, we needed to take our time to build something real, something lasting. As the weeks turned into months, it became clear that we weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. Our relationship grew stronger with each passing day, and with our son in our lives, everything felt complete. We spent our weekends talking about the future, planning trips, and imagining what our life would look like in the years to come. One evening, after dinner at our favorite little Italian restaurant, Rachel looked at me, her eyes sparkling with that familiar warmth that had drawn me to her in the first place. She seemed nervous, which was unusual for her. Rachel was always so composed, so sure of herself. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice soft. I set my wine glass down, suddenly alert. "What is it?" She hesitated for just a moment before the words spilled out. "I'm pregnant." For a second, I didn't know how to react. My mind raced, my heart doing somersaults in my chest. I wasn't sure what to say at first, but then I saw the uncertainty in her eyes, the fear that I might not take the news well. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't like last time. This wasn't Sarah using a pregnancy to control me. This was Rachel, the woman I loved, carrying our child. "That's amazing," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Her smile lit up the room, and in that moment, I felt a joy I hadn't felt in years. I was going to be a father again, and this time, it was different. This time, it was real. It wasn't about control or manipulation. It was about love. We spent the next few weeks making plans, talking about how we would make it work, how we would raise our children together. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel overwhelmed by the future. I didn't feel trapped or scared. I felt ready to step up, to be the father this child deserved, to build a family with Rachel. The months that followed were some of the happiest of my life. Despite the lingering legal battles with Sarah, despite the challenges of co-parenting, I finally felt like I was moving forward. Rachel and I were building something real, something solid. Our son was born in the fall, and holding him in my arms, I knew that everything I had been through, all the pain, all the heartache, had led me to this moment. Sarah was still out there, still trying to cause problems, but her power over me had evaporated. The truth had come out, and she could no longer manipulate me the way she once had. The court ruled in my favor regarding child support, and with that, I was finally free. Free from the weight of the past, free to build the future I had always wanted. Looking down at my newborn son, I knew that I had been given a second chance. A chance to be the kind of man I had always wanted to be, the kind of father my children deserved. And with Rachel by my side, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Months after the birth of our son, the storm that had once dominated my life had finally begun to clear. The legal battles with Sarah had slowly faded into the background, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. As expected, she made things as difficult as possible during the custody arrangements. But once the court had ruled in my favor, her ability to manipulate the situation was significantly reduced. I could breathe again, knowing that my life was finally moving in the direction I wanted. Still, despite everything, I couldn't pretend that it had been easy. Co-parenting with Sarah was always going to be a challenge. She had a way of complicating even the simplest decisions. We'd argue over school schedules, holidays, and even what the kids were allowed to eat. It was exhausting, but I had learned how to navigate her manipulations over time. I kept my cool, refused to rise to her provocations, and always focused on what was best for the kids. That's what kept me grounded in the middle of all the chaos, knowing that, above all, my children needed stability, love, and security, and I was determined to give them that, no matter what Sarah tried to pull. On the other side of things, life with Rachel was blossoming into something beautiful. Our home had become a sanctuary, a place where peace, love, and joy thrived. We didn't just survive anymore, we lived. Every day felt like we were building something stronger, more permanent than anything I had experienced before. Our son, who had become the center of our world, brought us even closer. His laughter filled our home, and with every passing day, I was reminded of how lucky I was to have found Rachel, to have created this life with her. Rachel and I had our routines, our little family traditions that made everything feel whole. On Saturdays, we'd take our son to the park, watching him explore the world with wide-eyed curiosity. On Sunday mornings, we'd cook breakfast together, Rachel making pancakes while I tried, and usually failed, to master the art of scrambled eggs. It was the simple things that mattered most to me now. After all the turmoil, after all the years of feeling like I was walking on broken glass, I had finally found stability, peace. But that didn't mean life was without its challenges. Even though Sarah had lost most of her control over me, she still had a presence in my life through the kids. I had to see her regularly for exchanges, And while I kept things civil for the sake of our children, the tension was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Sarah would make snide comments, small digs at Rachel, or passive-aggressive remarks about my parenting. But I didn't take the bait. I had learned by now that engaging with Sarah only gave her more power, and I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction anymore. One afternoon, I met Sarah at the usual spot to exchange the kids. She was running late, as usual, and when she finally arrived, she had a sour expression on her face. I could tell she had something on her mind, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. We were there for one reason, to make sure the kids got where they needed to be. But Sarah, being Sarah, couldn't resist stirring the pot. "So," she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "I hear you and Rachel are living the perfect little life now." I didn't respond, just focused on helping the kids into the car. I wasn't going to let her get to me. Sarah continued, undeterred. "It must be nice, huh? Playing house with her while I'm stuck dealing with the aftermath of everything you left behind." Finally, I turned to face her. "Sarah, this isn't about you or me anymore. It's about the kids. Let's keep it that way." She narrowed her eyes, clearly frustrated that I wasn't rising to the bait. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? But people don't just forget. You can't just rewrite history and pretend you're the good guy." Her words stung, but I knew better than to let her see that. I didn't need to prove anything to her. I had spent years living under her shadow, constantly trying to defend myself against her accusations, her manipulations. But now, I didn't owe her anything. "Look, Sarah," I said calmly, "I'm not going to do this with you. We have the kids to focus on. That's all that matters." She scoffed, clearly annoyed that her attempts to start an argument had failed. "Right. Whatever you say, James." I watched as she walked away, a part of me still amazed at how different things had become. Once upon a time, her words would have sent me spiraling, filled me with guilt and self-doubt. But not anymore. I was done living in the past. I had a future to build with Rachel, and that's where my focus needed to be. As the months passed, Rachel and I grew more confident in our life together. We were no longer just trying to blend our lives. We had succeeded. Our home had become a place of warmth and love, and the kids, despite everything, were thriving. They adored Rachel, and watching her with them filled me with a sense of peace I hadn't thought was possible. But even with the happiness we had built, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was one final piece missing. I had been given a second chance at life, and I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of it with Rachel. She had been my rock through everything, and I couldn't imagine a future without her. So, one evening, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, I took her hand in mine. "Rachel," I began, my heart pounding in my chest, "I need to tell you something." She looked at me, her eyes filled with that warmth I had come to love. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say. "You've been there for me in ways I never expected. You helped me pick up the pieces of my life when everything was falling apart, and you've shown me what it means to truly love someone. I don't want to spend another day without you by my side." Rachel's eyes widened, and I could see the emotion building behind them. "James," I smiled, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a small box. Opening it, I revealed the ring I had been carrying with me for weeks, waiting for the right moment. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, time seemed to stand still. I watched as Rachel's expression shifted from surprise to joy, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't say anything at first, just threw her arms around me, holding me tightly. And then, finally, she whispered the words I had been hoping to hear. "Yes. Of course, yes." In that moment, everything fell into place. The life I had once thought was shattered beyond repair had been rebuilt, and this time, it was stronger than ever. I had found the love I had always been searching for, and I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The months that followed were filled with excitement as we planned our wedding. We kept it small, just family and close friends. After everything we had been through, we didn't need anything extravagant. It was about celebrating the life we had built together, the love that had brought us through the darkest times. The wedding day itself was perfect, simple and intimate, just as we had wanted. We exchanged vows under a canopy of trees, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in soft golden rays. As we stood there, surrounded by the people who had supported us through everything, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life had thrown so many challenges my way, but in the end, I had found something worth holding on to. Rachel had given me more than I ever thought I deserved, and now, as I looked into her eyes, I knew that this was the beginning of the rest of our lives. After the wedding, we took a small trip, just the two of us, leaving the kids with Rachel's parents for a few days. It wasn't a grand honeymoon, but it didn't need to be. We spent our days walking along the beach, talking about the future, dreaming about the life we would continue to build together. And every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt more at peace than I had in years. But life, as always, has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. A few months after the wedding, I received a call from my lawyer. Sarah had filed for a modification to the custody agreement. She was claiming that I wasn't holding up my end of the arrangement, accusing me of neglecting the kids and prioritizing my new life with Rachel over my responsibilities as a father. It was a blatant attempt to stir up trouble, but I couldn't afford to ignore it. I was furious. After everything we had been through, after the court had ruled in my favor, Sarah was still trying to use the legal system to manipulate the situation. But this time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Rachel was my anchor throughout the ordeal. She stood by my side, offering her unwavering support as we prepared to face Sarah's accusations in court. My lawyer was confident that we had nothing to worry about. Sarah's claims were baseless, and we had plenty of evidence to prove that I had been nothing but a dedicated father to my children. But that didn't stop the anxiety from creeping in. The court date arrived, and as we sat in the courtroom, I could feel Sarah's eyes on me. She was trying to intimidate me, to make me feel like I was still under her control. But I wasn't the same man I had been during our marriage. I had found my strength, and I wasn't going to let her take that away from me. The hearing went as expected. Sarah's accusations were quickly dismissed, and the judge reaffirmed the original custody arrangement. As we left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had finally won. Sarah's attempts to control me had failed, and there was nothing she could do to change that. But even though the legal battle was over, I knew that co-parenting with Sarah would continue to be a challenge. There would always be moments of tension, moments when she tried to push my buttons. But I had learned how to navigate those waters, and with Rachel by my side, I knew I could handle whatever came our way. Life continued to move forward, and as the years passed, our family grew stronger. Rachel and I welcomed another child, a little girl, into the world, and our home was once again filled with the laughter and joy of new life. The kids adjusted to the changes, and while co-parenting with Sarah wasn't always easy, we found a way to make it work for their sake. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized how far I had come. The man who had once been trapped in a toxic marriage, weighed down by guilt and self-doubt, was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, someone who had learned how to fight for what truly mattered. I had found love again, built a family that filled my life with meaning, and most importantly, I had learned how to let go of the past. Rachel had shown me that life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. It's the imperfections, the challenges, the moments of struggle that make the good times all the more precious. And as I stood on the porch of our home, watching our children play in the yard, I knew that no matter what the future held, I was ready to face it. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And that, more than anything, was the life I had always dreamed of. Time has a way of healing wounds, even the deepest ones. As the years went by, life settled into a rhythm I never thought I'd have again. A rhythm of peace, joy, and, most importantly, love. The chaos that once dominated every aspect of my existence had been replaced with something I didn't even know I was capable of: stability. Rachel and I built a life that, while not perfect, was filled with a sense of purpose and a quiet happiness. Our children grew up in a home where love was the foundation of everything, where they knew they were cherished, and where their voices mattered. The atmosphere was different from the one I had been so used to in my marriage with Sarah. With Rachel, there was no manipulation, no tension simmering just beneath the surface. Instead, there was a genuine partnership, an understanding that we were in this together, no matter what. Our son, who had come into the world amid the ashes of my previous life, was growing into an adventurous, curious child who filled our home with laughter. And when we welcomed our daughter into the family, it felt like the final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. Our little girl was full of life, and watching her grow reminded me every day of how far I had come, of how much I had fought to get to this point. Parenthood with Rachel was a different experience altogether. It wasn't something that felt like an obligation, a task to be completed between the struggles of work and survival. It felt like a privilege. We shared the responsibilities of raising our children equally, and instead of feeling like I was constantly failing, as I had with Sarah, I felt empowered. Rachel was there every step of the way, never judging, always encouraging. It was as if we had created our own little world, one where love and respect were the pillars holding everything up. And yet, even as I enjoyed this new chapter of my life, Sarah remained a part of the background. Co-parenting, as always, was a complicated dance. She had never fully let go of the bitterness from our divorce. There were moments when her anger would bubble to the surface, manifesting in snide comments or passive-aggressive jabs, particularly about Rachel. She couldn't seem to accept that I had moved on and that I was happy. But as time went on, something shifted. The court battles, the custody disputes, all of it had left Sarah isolated. The friends who had once rallied around her, supporting her narrative of the wronged wife, had slowly distanced themselves. She had built her entire life around the story that she was the victim, that I had abandoned her. And when that story fell apart, she didn't know what to do. It became clear that, despite all her attempts to control the situation, she was struggling. And while I wasn't responsible for her happiness anymore, there was a part of me that still felt pity for her. I had learned to let go of the anger, to release the resentment that had once consumed me. After all, I had one. I had built a new life, and I wasn't going to let the past dictate my future any longer. But Sarah, it seemed, couldn't do the same. One day, during a routine exchange of the kids, something unexpected happened. Sarah arrived, as usual, but instead of her typical defensive posture or cutting remarks, she seemed different. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, her voice lacking the sharp edge it usually carried. I was caught off guard. Sarah wasn't one to ask for anything unless it was to gain an advantage. But something about her demeanor made me agree. I nodded, gesturing for the kids to go ahead and wait in the car while we spoke on the porch. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She looked down at her hands, avoiding eye contact, as if she were searching for the right words. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened between us." I stayed silent, unsure of where this was going. "I know I made a lot of mistakes," she continued, her voice faltering. "And I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I've been trying to figure out how to move on. I've been stuck in the past for so long, holding on to this idea that if I could just make you feel guilty enough, I could somehow fix things." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of unresolved anger and pain. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry," she whispered, finally looking up at me. "I'm sorry for everything." I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. I had waited years to hear those words, but now that they were here, they didn't feel the way I had imagined they would. There was no sense of victory, no rush of satisfaction, just a quiet understanding that this was the end of a chapter that had needed to close a long time ago. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice soft. "But it's not just about the past anymore, Sarah. It's about moving forward. We both have to find a way to let go of what happened and focus on what's best for the kids." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know. I'm trying. I don't know how." I didn't have an answer for her. I wasn't responsible for her healing, and I wasn't going to pretend that I could fix what had been broken between us. But I did know that this was a moment of closure I hadn't expected. For years, I had carried the weight of our failed marriage, the resentment, the anger. But standing there, looking at the woman who had once torn my life apart, I realized that I had finally let go of all of it. "You'll figure it out," I said, offering her a small smile. "We both will." And with that, the conversation ended. Sarah walked back to her car, and I watched her drive away, a sense of finality settling over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the one where I could finally close the book on that part of my life and move forward without looking back. As I got into the car and drove away with the kids, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The chapter with Sarah had come to a close, and now I could focus entirely on the future, on my family with Rachel, on the life we had built together. As the years passed, Rachel and I continued to grow closer. Our children thrived in the environment we had created for them, one where they were loved unconditionally and supported in every way. We navigated the ups and downs of parenthood together, learning as we went, but always with the understanding that we were a team. There were challenges, of course. There always are when you're raising a family. But those challenges never felt insurmountable. With Rachel by my side, I knew that we could handle anything that came our way. She had taught me what it meant to truly love someone, to be in a relationship that was based on mutual respect and understanding. And as our children grew, so did our love for one another. We shared in their triumphs and comforted each other during their struggles. Our home was filled with laughter, with the warmth of family and the joy of watching our kids grow into the people they were meant to be. One evening, many years later, as we sat on the porch of our home, watching the sun set over the horizon, I looked over at Rachel and smiled. She was holding my hand, our fingers intertwined, and the weight of everything we had been through seemed like a distant memory. "Can you believe how far we've come?" I asked, my voice full of wonder. Rachel smiled, her eyes twinkling with that familiar warmth that had drawn me to her all those years ago. "I can," she said softly, "because we've been through it all together." I nodded, grateful beyond words for the life we had built. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when I thought I would never find happiness again. But I had. I had found love, I had found peace, and I had built a life that was more fulfilling than I ever could have imagined. Looking back on everything, the pain, the betrayal, the years of uncertainty, I realized that every moment had led me to this one. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Rachel rested her head on my shoulder, and together we watched the sky turn from gold to pink, the promise of a new day just beyond the horizon. No matter what came next, I knew that I was ready, because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And with Rachel by my side, I knew that anything was possible,